What is it that makes you, you? For centuries, we've pictured it as this simple battle, nature versus nurture. But as we're about to see, modern science tells a story that's so much more complex and, frankly, a lot more interesting.
So let's just ask the question straight up. What has the final say in who you become? Is it the genetic blueprint you get from your parents? Or is it the world you grow up in? Your family, your friends, your culture? This simple question has actually led scientists to a really profound and fascinating puzzle. All right, to get to the heart of all this, we first have to understand the main tools scientists use to even try to measure the influence of our genes. It's a concept that's incredibly powerful, but also widely misunderstood. And that tool is called heritability. Now, the definition here is super precise for a reason. Heritability does not mean that, say, 50% of your intelligence comes from your genes. It's a population statistic. It's trying to estimate how much of the differences we see across an entire group of people can be chalked up to genetic differences within that group. It's a subtle distinction, but it's an absolutely crucial one.
For about a century, the gold standard for calculating heritability was the twin study. You just compare identical twins, who share all their DNA, to fraternal twins, who share about half. Simple enough. But now we have a much newer, high-tech approach, genome-wide association studies, or GWAS. This is where we scan the actual DNA of thousands of people, hunting for tiny genetic markers linked to a specific trait. So we've got two different methods, both trying to answer the same basic question. So, what did 100 years of those classic twin studies tell us about something as complex as IQ? Well, they pretty consistently landed on a heritability estimate of around 50%. This suggested that about half the variation in intelligence scores across a population could be statistically linked back to our genes.
But then came the newer DNA studies, the GWS. And when they tried to find these specific genes responsible for that 50%, they could only account for about 10% of the variation in IQ, a dramatically smaller number.
And this chart right here, this illustrates what scientists now call the missing heritability problem. It's so clear when you see it laid out like this. Twin studies point to a 50% genetic influence, but our most advanced DNA analysis can only find 10%. That leaves this massive 40% gap. So where did all that heritability go? Well, it turns out the mystery is a lot deeper than just one missing number. To really get our heads around this challenge, we need to break the problem down. It's not just one gap, but really three distinct interconnected challenges that scientists are wrestling with right now. First, you have the numerical gap, which we've just seen. But that then leads to what's called a prediction gap. And then, the biggest one of all, a mechanism gap. So let's take a look at each one, because each one reveals another layer of this whole puzzle. Okay, so the numerical gap, this is the most straightforward piece. It's that 40% difference we just saw between the old twin studies and the new DNA studies. This is the headline problem, the one that gets all the attention. Then you have the prediction gap. I mean, you would think that with the ability to read someone's entire genome, we could make some pretty solid predictions about them, right? But we can't. Even with all this amazing data, our ability to predict complex traits from DNA alone is still surprisingly weak. It's like the information is in there somewhere, but we're just not reading it correctly. And that brings us to the third and, honestly, the deepest mystery of all, the mechanism gap. And here's the crucial part. We know there are thousands of tiny genetic variations involved, and each one has just a minuscule effect. But how on earth do they all interact with each other and with the environment to build something as complex as personality or intelligence? We can see the statistical link, but we just don't understand the biological story. So how are scientists even trying to think about this mechanism gap? Well, one of the key concepts they're turning to is something called emergence. As this quote explains, the basic idea is that the whole is truly greater than the sum of its parts. You can't understand a complex system by just looking at its individual little pieces in isolation. And here's a perfect way to think about it. Imagine a single H2O molecule.
It doesn't have any property that we would call wetness. Wetness is an emergent property. It only appears when billions of those molecules get together and interact in a particular way. It's entirely possible that our traits are just like this. They don't live inside individual genes, but they emerge from the staggeringly complex network of interactions between them.
Okay, so with all that genetic complexity in mind, let's switch gears and move to the other side of the equation. Let's look at how our understanding of nurture has also become way more nuanced. Turns out the environment is just as complex as the genome.
This quote from Judith Rich Harris's groundbreaking book, The Nurture Assumption, introduces a pretty radical idea. For decades, we all just assumed that parents were the primary shapers of a child's environment. Harris comes along and argues that we've been looking in the wrong place entirely.
The core of her argument is that from a very young age, a child's social world splits in two. You've got the world at home, and then you have the world outside the home with their peers. And it's that second world, the culture created by their peers, that actually has the more lasting impact on their personality and their behavior. The fundamental drive isn't to please mom and dad, it's to be a successful member of the group. So, how do kids manage these two completely different worlds? They do it through this remarkable skill called code switching. It's the ability to just fluidly change how you act, how you talk, to match whatever social context you're in. We all do it to some extent, but children, they're absolute masters of it.
The Cinderella story is used as a perfect example. At home, under the thumb of her stepmother, she's one person. But at the ball, in a totally different social context, a completely different identity emerges. Kids do this every single day when they walk out the front door, leaving their family's world and stepping into the world of their friends.
So what happens when we put these two big, complex ideas together? You have the mystery of missing heritability on the nature side, and this powerful influence of peer context on the nurture side. When you combine them, you get a completely new picture. It just becomes so clear that nature versus nurture was never the right way to think about it. It's not a competition, it's a constant dynamic interplay. Our genes might provide a set of predispositions, sure, but it's the social contexts we navigate that activate, suppress, and ultimately shape how those predispositions get expressed. So the crucial points to take away from all this are really threefold. First, heritability is a useful scientific concept for looking at populations, but it is not a deterministic score for you as an individual. Second, we have to look beyond the family home, to the playground and the classroom, to find the most powerful environmental forces shaping us. And finally, who we are isn't simply written in our DNA or molded by our parents. It emerges from this incredibly complex dance between our biology and our social world. And that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. If the peer groups and the social contexts we find ourselves in are so profoundly influential, well, it raises a new question about free will and identity. To what extent can we consciously choose our environments, our friends, our communities, our cultures, and in doing so actually take an active role in shaping who we become?